Today, I'm joined by Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks to talk about the Atlanta Hawks and give you everything you need to know about them going into the playoffs. Welcome into the Locked On NBA playoff preview. I'm Nick Engstead, host of Locked On NBA, and I'm joined by Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks to give you everything you need to know about the Hawks going into the postseason. Brad, this team has been kind of the definition of mid, right? They've been 500 for a long time. What's the biggest on-court story for your team? I know there's been some off-court things with trade requests, new coach, all kinds of different things. What's the biggest on-court story for your team this year?
It probably is exactly what you said. The fact that the Hawks always managed to get back to the middle. In fact, they managed to lose their last two games. They were threatening to be over 500 at the end of the season, and they happened to lose the last two, and now are 41-41, perfect synergy. You know, as far as what you just mentioned, like they have some off-court stuff. The new coach in the middle of the season is probably the biggest storyline because that affects everything moving forward. But as for this season, they've just kind of been in the middle, and it's mostly good offense, bad defense. They're not mid at everything, but they are hovering around that range, and it's been frustrating from top to bottom.
New coach, Quinn Snyder coming in. That was a big deal for this team. What have been the biggest differences on court between Quinn Snyder and the former coach?
Yeah, I think it's been mostly the same, and I think he even admitted that it's really almost unprecedented for a coach of his stature to come in mid-season in the way that he did and take over a team that was trying to win. Usually see if that happens, it's a team that's kind of out of it and you're resetting, but he came in and he's like, well, we're going to try to win. We're trying to win right now, and he's left a lot of things untouched. He's put some stamp on things, though. Offensively, they've been better since he got there, more free-flowing. I think that's probably the most natural place to start. The Hawks have had a top 5 offense after the All-Star break. Unfortunately, the wins have not really come along with that, but they've looked like more than what they're supposed to be looking like on offense. This is a team that a year ago with Trae Young was number 2 in the league in offense, that really had fallen off to being okay still, but not great offensively in the first half of the season. Now they're firing on all cylinders, playing with more pace, playing with more spacing, more three-point shooting, etc. A little bit more of a modern offense versus the old-school approach of the previous regime. Unfortunately, the defense is still lagging behind, and part of that's personnel-driven, but I think people are starting to see what Snyder wants to do offensively, which is a positive thing.
Yeah, a new school offense with a also new school defense, which is none in the NBA as of right now. Did Quinn Snyder bring in his own assistants? I don't know if I even know that. Does he just keep the same assistants that he had, or how did that work?
It was very odd. He kept the same guys. To his credit, actually, he's got a lot of praise for that. He could have just cleaned house, but it would have been awkward. It's in the middle of the season, you have to have assistants, and you can't really bring in a whole new staff in the middle of the year because guys have jobs. You can't just bring people from outside. He did bring 2 guys in later on that were with him in Utah that are more like supplementary guys. But as far as the core assistants that are on the bench with him, it's still Nate McMillan's guys. So it's a little bit challenging. I think at the end of the season, you'll probably see an overhaul of some sort. But for now, it's Quinn with Nate McMillan's staff.
That is really interesting. I'm so curious how that would work, and we'll probably never know because that's all internal stuff. But for the Hawks, what's their playoff rotation? What are the guys you see going into a play-in game and then maybe in a playoff series? What's the rotation? Is there anybody on the bubble that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think for the most part, if they're healthy, it's fairly clear at least the top 9, and then you might get a 10th. Their starters have been all year long when healthy. You're talking about Trae Young and Dejounte Murray, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, Clint Capella. They were really good early in the year. They've kind of regressed a little bit later on, but that's their core 5-man group. They also traded for Saddiq Bey, who's going to be a lock to play as sort of a backup 3-4 type. You have backup wings like Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's been a highly coveted 6-man type for a while, and backup center on Onyeka Okongwu. That's their top 8 absolute locks. And then the 9th guy would be Jaylen Johnson, their first-round pick from 2 years ago. He's played in every game for a few weeks now and seems to be really impressing on both ends of the floor. So I think he's going to play. If they go any further, AJ Griffin has been their standout rookie for this year. But as I just mentioned, he's a rookie. Rookies sometimes get excised in the playoffs. So he's the swing guy along with Johnson. And not coincidentally, those 2 guys are very young. This is basically their rookie seasons for both of them. Jaylen barely played in his first season. So if they go sort of trimmed down, it'll be probably at the absence of those 2 guys, and they have their core 8 and more.
What are the biggest strengths and weaknesses for the Hawks? We kind of mentioned the offense-defense thing that they play, but how do they win games and how do they lose games?
Yeah, they really win games with this explosive offensive attack. Having Trae Young, number 1, for all of his polarization, he's an excellent offensive player. There's no question about that. He drives good offense. He's an individual scorer, also one of the best passers in the league. And when he's on the floor, they are generally awesome on offense, almost no matter who's around him. You throw in Dejounte Murray, and you have this dual approach. And for the first time in Trae Young's career, basically, they have someone who can actually run the offense when he sits on the bench, which is obviously not a small thing if your offense falls off completely when your star sits on the bench. But generally speaking, I think it's just mostly just the offense in general, but also they're good on the offensive glass. They're really good at taking care of the ball. That's probably their number one strength on offense, which you wouldn't probably think of for a team that is engineered by this small sort of score first, pass first point guard. But the Hawks are perennially a top 3 team in the league in turnover rate. They never turn the ball over, and that really allows you to maximize possessions on offense. As far as where they lose games, for me, it's the perimeter defense, which partly is Trae Young. It's not all Trae Young by any means. I think he gets unfairly picked on for being the only problem, and he's really not the only problem. But I've been saying all year on my show, like, perimeter defense has been their problem. They can't contain the ball. They can't stay in front of everybody, and they put a lot of pressure on their backline guys. And Capella and Okongwu and Collins are good defenders, but they're not complete and utter miracle workers. They have to stop people on the perimeter, and when they don't do that, they find themselves looking up at the scoreboard and not liking what they actually see.
What have we seen from that Trae Young and Dejounte Murray pairing? This is the first year that we've seen those two guys. It seems like, well, they've been 500, so it hasn't seemed to have incredible results. But what have we seen from those two?
Yeah, it's been, I'd like to call it kind of meh. It's not been terrible by any means. Like, you would have expected if the Hawks were 500 this year, honestly, for that pairing to not have worked at all. If you told me only that the Hawks had played like this, I would have said, oh, it was probably a disaster with Trae and Dejounte. And it really hasn't been a disaster. It hasn't been fantastic, but the numbers are fine. They're slightly positive with those two guys on the floor together, but you need to be better than that when you have that much invested in those two. A lot was paid in the trade for Murray. They're not a perfect fit together. They never were, but I think it's been still a lot of your turn, my turn. That's one of the projects of the Quinn Snyder era, is trying to figure out how those guys work best together. And anytime they actually play off each other well, Snyder makes sure to mention it. I think he's trying to build that up behind the scenes just to say, look, guys, you have to use each other and not just play your turn, my turn, alternating. And it can work the way it's been done. But I think it's definitely an incomplete, but also it's probably like a C-. It hasn't been horrible, but they haven't lit the world on fire either. I think that's probably indicative of their record, because if it had gone really well, they'd be better than this.
What are the expectations for this team? They're going into a play-in. Do they expect to win the play-in, make the playoffs? Do they think that they're a playoff team in waiting? What are the expectations from both the team, the fans, and then you?
Yeah, I think realistically, they do believe that they should be getting into the playoffs. The math's on their side there too, just because once you're in the 7-8 game, you get 2 chances. And if you just kind of do the math on that, you're more likely to get in than not when you have 2 chances. But they're going to be underdogs in their first game in the play-in. And then you have to come back and win a win or go home game. And that makes life a little bit challenging. I think internally they definitely have that expectation to get in the playoffs and make some noise. I don't think anybody is just going to be, maybe at least with True Sir, I'm going to tell you that they're going to go out and beat Boston or Milwaukee in the first round. That's not likely, I don't believe. But I think if they're at least competitive, especially after last year when they had a pretty embarrassing playoff loss to Miami, when kind of the offense melted down, it kind of prompted a lot of the changes that they actually made. To be better than that, get into the playoffs is probably the number one goal, of course, and then just not get blown out, not get run over, and have something to build on positively for the future. Because the one thing is, as soon as Snyder came in, it's kind of all shifted into somewhat future-facing mode for this team. They're obviously still trying to win now, but when you do that change midseason and invest a 5-year contract in a new coach, it becomes kind of all right, let's look ahead a little bit more. And I think they're probably still trying to do that while managing the reality that all these guys want to win now.
What are your expectations for this team? Do you expect them to, let's start with the Heat game. Do you expect them to win this first play-in game? Do you expect them to be a playoff team? And where do you see them?
Yeah, I think they have a pretty good chance to beat Miami. I wouldn't pick them. It's a road game. If it was in Atlanta, I'd probably pick them. Honestly, I'm not very high on Miami this year, all things considered. But considering it's a one-game playoff on the road against Jimmy Butler, it's tough to pick the Hawks. I do believe that they will win the game on Friday if they need to, the second play-in game. I think they're at least as good or better than Toronto and Chicago. I think they're better than Chicago, probably similar to Toronto. And having that game at home is very helpful. Plus, they have, in my mind, the best player in the series with Trae. I shouldn't say series, mini-series with Trae Young. So I think they get in the playoffs. I think they probably lose to whoever they play in the first round in pretty convincing fashion, but not necessarily embarrassing either. They're probably more talented than the average 7 or 8 seed, but probably not going to be capable of winning either. So I'm expecting them to play for a few more weeks, and then it'll be offseason mode after that.
The FanDuel line right now is Hawks +5 against the Heat. So they're a 5-point underdog. Is that, you think that's a fair line? And what do the Hawks have to do to overcome those 5 points and beat the Heat?
I think it's fair. I think that probably tells you that Miami is slightly better, and then you throw in the home court advantage, and that kind of gets you to 5 points. I'd probably lean Atlanta, honestly, with that number, because the Hawks can score on really anyone. I think the biggest thing is going to be whether they can stop Miami. And Miami's offense is not necessarily the most prolific in the world, but Atlanta's issues on the perimeter have been challenging. Jimmy Butler gives them fits a lot. And if you throw in the fact that Trae Young has always struggled against Miami, that gives a little bit of pause for concern. But I do think that in a one-game scenario, with the way the Hawks can play offense, the playing field gets leveled a lot. Like when you're number 2, number 3 in the league in offense over a 2-3 month sample size, you can score on anybody, and that includes Miami. So I would lean to the Hawks and the points if you want to get down and dirty with our friends at FanDuel.
Go listen to Brad Rowland on Locked On Hawks 5 days a week, all through the playoffs, postseason, I guess. Maybe we'll just say 5 days a week through the postseason and then into the offseason as well. Go listen to Locked On Hawks. Guys, thanks for hanging out with us on the Locked On NBA playoff preview.